Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. Welcome, friends, to this Wednesday evening Dhamma discussion and meditation practice. So this evening we're going to be continuing our discussion on the 12 links of dependent origination. I hope that most of you were also tuned in last week to, participate or to hear the first, the beginning of that very important topic. So this is a review. The 12 links of dependent origination basically is a step-by-step kind of explanation about how, the origin of suffering and the cessation of suffering and the various factors of our body, mind, and life that are linked together, to keep the mind propelled in the process of samsara. Basically, that means undergoing birth and death from physical lifetime to physical lifetime, but also from moment to moment, as we will get into later. And that the term samsara is appropriate. It's called perpetual wandering. And it refers to our mind, and our mind is continually, perpetually wandering back to the past and then projecting and hoping into the future and, creating all kinds of different, actions of body, speech, and mind in pursuit of pleasure or indulging in the mind's delusions or anger and hatred. So the mind is just all over the place most of the time for most people because basically they don't have much control over it. And it's kind of just fueled and propelled by the accumulated habits that we have. And we keep on repeating the same habits over and over. And, getting caught up and accumulating fresh karmic actions and sankharas that keep the mind, continually moving in that process of just satisfying its desires or wants or getting caught up in its various mental states, the whole gamut of mental states. Depression, anxiety, obsessions, fears, and getting caught up in all kinds of worries and about all those things, and even to the point of driving some people, mentally, insane, to use that term. but at least, so anyway, so last week we covered the ignorance. So the underlying cause of the mind going on in uncontrolled and, erratic type of behaviors and thoughts and actions is ignorance. And that means not knowing the truth about the mind. So we talked about that last week, so I'm not going to repeat all those things in detail. But ignorance basically means not understanding the Four Noble Truths. It doesn't mean ignorant about how to use a computer or something like that. Specifically, the Buddha was very clear in its ignorance about the nature of suffering, not understanding the nature of suffering, what it is and how it continues, and what are the causes that keep the mind in that state of perpetual wandering. And it doesn't know how that can be brought under control or brought to an end, how suffering can be brought to an end. That means self-created suffering. It doesn't mean about suffering in the world, essentially. It means the suffering that we bring on by ourselves through our continual exercise of greed, hatred, and delusion, and uncontrolled thoughts and behaviors. So that's self-created. That means we're, by ourself, we are speaking, acting, thinking, and with attachments, aversions, delusions, fears, worries, and spontaneously reacting without any much control. And that's how people's lives get more and more enmeshed in, suffering, basically. Okay, so ignorance, and that's what keeps on, depending on that, arise the volitional formation. So the volitional formations are those very thoughts of greed, hatred, and delusion, and the habits that go with them that we've cultivated that, basically keep repeating themselves, because all these things are basically in the brain. Ever since we're a baby, the neurons, we've been creating neural pathways and, activating the different centers within the brain which deal with various types of emotions and our motor responses and virtually everything. So the volitional formations basically are like the computer program. A computer can't do anything by itself, really. You have to program it. And whatever information you program it with, that's what it's going to do. So the same with our mind, basically. When we are born, it gets programmed. Our parents program us to speak certain languages, to act certain ways. And we grow up watching media and going to school and neighbors and so many influences. And this is all being absorbed into the mind of the young child, creating these various habits. And these become the volitional formations. That means we're going to start repeating the habits. If you hear people continually using four-letter words and all that, and then you're going to start doing that too. At least, a lot of people. And seeing other people, various habits. You see them smoking, drinking, and then the media and all these things. Anyway, we talked about that last week. So now this week, actually, I wanted to focus on the third link. Depending on these volitional formations arises consciousness. Now, consciousness as it's defined is, that means seeing, we become conscious and aware of things. So things that we see, hear, smell, taste, feel with the body, and even think about. A thought comes in our mind and we might start thinking about it. Or, remember some thought of anger comes up and the mind goes with that and starts building it up and taking decisions and all kind of other thoughts. And along with this consciousness is the sense of I am doing it. The sense of I am the one that hears, sees, tastes, smells, touches, thinks. I'm the one that's deciding. I'm the one that's doing things. So it's that I consciousness. The awareness has taken on this I, which is essentially a part of the sankhara. So, because it's a habit that we accumulated, and I've given talks already about how the mind has acquired the ego consciousness from the time of being a young baby. And how it's just, keeps on snowballing and getting stronger and stronger and forming more and more desires and aversions as the person grows older. And because no one has told us any different, people just, it goes on automatic. Most people don't have an original thought even in their mind because everything is conditioned by something else. So anyway, the volitional formations generates the consciousness. Now, this is where it becomes, it's a difficult concept to understand. Now, basically, in the formula of dependent origination, it means the rebirth consciousness. So we have to go back a moment. So during our life, we go on creating a lot of sankharas. We go on developing more and more sankharas. We go on creating a lot of karma and memories in our mind. We accumulate more fears, worries, anxieties, greed, hatred, and delusion as we, continue with the life. Now, this is like fuel. Every time you'd strengthen sankhara, that means any action of body, speech, or mind, it's like you're putting fresh fuel into the gas tank. To keep it simple, to use a simple analogy, you could see the sankharas, the volitional formations, is like putting gas in the tank. And as long as you keep on putting gas in the tank, the car is going to keep on going. But when you stop putting fresh gas in the tank, at some point the gasoline will run out and the car will stop driving. That means the mind will stop producing a rebirth when the sankharas become exhausted. And that means the karmic accumulations. We'll talk more about those later. But just to try to make this connection between the sankharas and the consciousness. Now, come back to the idea about rebirth. When you die, our mind is still, has all of its thoughts and worries and fears and memories and so on, and so that's a very powerful energy. And it's like, for some people, the mind is magnetized even stronger. Some people have a lot of hatred in their minds. Other people, maybe not so much hatred, but they might have a lot of lust and desire in their minds. And then other people may not have a lot of anger or lust, but a lot of delusion and strong ego-centeredness. Now, most people have an accumulation of all three, but some people have a preponderance toward more greed or more hatred or more delusion. But probably most people have you probably could say an equal balance of all three of those. Anyway, so the strongest memories at the time when a person finally dies, whether it's by accident or it's by laying in a hospital bed for months and months, and finally they die. So if that, if those sankharas, and especially the ego consciousness, is still strong in their minds, at that last thought before death is called something called relinking consciousness arises. That means when a person dies, if they die kind of, a natural death or, laying in the bed for a few days and, gradually they're going into unconsciousness and then finally they die. So at that last moment before death, or even if you die in a sudden accident, the whole unconscious rises up and the mind will grasp one of those unconscious images, a strong memory, and that is going to then, that energy is going to be attracted to another place to be reborn, whether it's in the human realm, animal realm, deva realm. Usually one of those three realms is where most people wind up being born. Of course, even in the hell realms or hungry ghosts. But, people don't believe in all that. Let's just say human and animal realm, people can relate to that. Anyway, so that consciousness that links one life to the next one is called, that's the consciousness, depending on the volitional formations. That means that unspent karma that we've accumulated over many previous lifetimes. If you don't believe in that, even in this one lifetime, if you live 50 or 60 years, you've created you've had billions and quadrillions of various thoughts, speech, and actions going through your body and mind that have been strengthened. So anyway, that is what produces or conditions this consciousness to seek another existence in order to continue on with it, because that gasoline has not been expired. So it has to search out another vehicle. That means another human body, animal body, deva realm, or wherever the karma is going to lead that consciousness. It's going to be attracted to another realm. So that's the link from the past life to this next life. The meaning of that, depending on volitional formations, arises consciousness. But that's not just a one-time thing, but in taking the lifetime to lifetime example of the Paticca Samuppada, then once that consciousness gets, inserts itself into the newly developing embryo in a mother's womb or animal womb, or even a spontaneous rebirth in a deva realm, those volitional formations then continue on producing consciousness in that new life. Because when a baby is born, when it comes out of the womb, it then starts to see, hear, taste, smell, touch, and feel things again. And even when it's in the womb, doctors have said, the baby can still hear sounds and things like that, even within the womb. It might hear sounds even. But especially when it comes out, then that consciousness continues again moment to moment with each sensory impingement. So, and basically it's, and depending on that consciousness then arises what is called mind and matter. So this is the link between consciousness and the next of these, the links, the fourth link, is now that the consciousness has come to another, goes into the womb. We'll just stick with the example of the human birth because that's what most people are familiar with. But it could be an animal birth too, because people have dogs and cats and, they see them get born and so on and have consciousness. So, but for all intents and purposes, we'll stick with the human. So when the baby comes out, then it starts, hearing, seeing things. And then little by little, as it learns language, and after about 6 months, the sense of an I comes into the baby's mind. And when the baby's first born, the I isn't there, but it still has awareness. So the baby's aware of sounds, of course, and it feels pain, and it might cry, of course, and these are instinctual things, but the sense of an I is not yet fully developed before about 6 months. But then when it starts learning languages and it starts to, people calling its name all the time, and it starts looking, and then this sense of an I gets established behind the eyes. And then it becomes a full-blown kind of, ego consciousness. So just to review these stages, because of the well, let's continue with the volitional formations. So now in this new life, these volitional formations will keep on working until the end of that next life. And this is where then, when the mind and the consciousness creates the new being, so that's called the mind and matter. If it's an animal body, okay, a cat has an animal body, but it also has a mind. And then depending on that, as the fetus develops, the mind and body starts developing in the womb, it acquires the senses, the 6 senses: the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And when it comes out of the womb, those senses then get stimulated. And it has contact. So depending on the mind and body, okay, this body comes out, but it has the senses. Now, some people might have defective senses, and so they're going to be left out, because we only experience the world through the contacts in our working sense organs. So a lot of people, are born deaf, for example, or born blind. Those are the two common, types of sense failures that some people, experience. Not a whole lot, but, enough. So they're not going to have that part of the world coming through them in terms of sounds and sights. There was somebody named Helen Keller back in, I don't know when it was, a long time ago, who was blind and deaf, but she wound up becoming very famous and doing a lot of things, even though she was blind and deaf. But anyway, coming back to our, discussion. So this consciousness, especially with the ego consciousness, and because of you have the 6 senses are working, you have contact. So, and contact is there's 3 things necessary to have contact. One is there has to be a sense organ that works, and there has to be an object coming into the eye. Let's say, for an example, okay, you're watching this screen, so you're having this eye consciousness of, me talking, and but all of a sudden, now, if I stopped talking, you wouldn't be hearing anything, or at least from this voice, there wouldn't be contact, but your eyes would still have contact. But anyway, there's, there's craving for that contact. Anyway, but so without the senses, there wouldn't be contact with the world. Now, a person who basically, there's none of their senses work, they would probably die. Because the brain wouldn't develop. The brain needs contact, especially in a young baby. If the baby doesn't have any contact, like with the mother, if a child is abandoned and doesn't have any contact, and put in a dark room, probably it would die, it wouldn't develop. Or if it did develop, it would probably be in a vegetative state. So it needs that contact to develop the brain and the new neural pathways in the brain, as it happens in a normal person. So anyway, I don't want to go too far in this dependent origination, but I wanted to come back and the rebirth from lifetime to lifetime is. It is spread over three lifetimes. So there's 12 links of dependent origination are spread over 3 lifetimes. That means, let's say when you die, you take with you from this last lifetime ignorance and the volitional formations. That's what you take from this lifetime to the next life. Now, in the consciousness, so you have ignorance, volitional formations, and the consciousness from this life goes to this next life. Now, in the next life, you then have the mind and body, the six senses, contact, feeling, craving, grasping, and becoming. And then in the future life, you have the rebirth and then the suffering, old age, and death, to the future life, or in this life itself. And then that whole process will begin again. Now, I know this may sound a little bit, confusing, but you can read about it. I encourage you to, Google the rebirth process in Theravada tradition, spread over those three, the Paticca Samuppada spread over those 3 lifetimes. But, as we go on talking about it in the next weeks, and hopefully it will become clear. And especially about in this life, we can't do much about it. We are already born in this life. We brought the ignorance with us from the past life, and the volitional formations got us born, produced the consciousness that got us born in this life. Now, in this life, we have a new mind and body, we have the 6 senses, and then we have contacts. And for 60, 70, 80, 90, or even 100 years, you are accumulating quadrillions and quadrillions. There's not even any limit to the amount of contacts that have come through our senses. I mean, sight, sound, smells, taste, touches, and thoughts going through our nervous system and brain the whole lifetime. And all of those things, or many of them, the strongest ones, become the new sankharas and keep those sankharas, going. And in this lifetime, we have the, feelings, pleasant, painful feelings. We develop more greed and desire for pleasurable feelings, more aversion for painful feelings. Then we have the craving, grasping, and becoming, to satisfy our desires, to get what we want or to get away from what we don't want. We are accumulating more karma. And then that mind is strengthened in that life. And when you die, those newly accumulated sankharas up to the moment you die are going to be the fresh fuel for the next life. Now, a lot of people have questions about the consciousness. And, one of the primary teachings of the Buddha, or the Dhamma, is the concept or idea of no self. That means that in some religions they believe there's a kind of a permanent soul that somehow was put into this body or mind that belongs to that person pretty much for eternity. I mean, some religions, I'm not going to mention which ones, but some of you may have ideas about that. But the idea of an unchanging soul or self that keeps on going from life to life. Now, the Buddha said that is not what happens to our consciousness. Sure, the consciousness goes, but it's not a kind of like a little atom or something that goes to the next life and becomes yourself again. But it's a continually recreated the process over and over again. So this concept of no self is the cornerstone teaching in the Buddhist teaching. And basically it means the sense of the I that we have. We created it, from the time we were a baby. You weren't born with it. You were born with ignorance, but you weren't born with some kind of a separate self. At least that is the general accepted idea within the Buddhist teaching. But there is this consciousness and the continuity of consciousness. And so people might call it themselves, or we can call it ourself, but it's continually changing and rebecoming. It's not the same self, because every time you hear, see, taste, smell, touch, think about something, our mind has changed a bit, and it's not the same as before. Your mind can, take a lot of different turns and avenues, and basically that's due to conditioning. But we think that we're deciding to do these things. People are always saying, I feel this way, I'm deciding that, I want to do this, I want to do that. But there's no static or separate kind of I that's deciding that. It's all decided by sankharas and by conditioning and where you are at, live in the world, and everything that is kind of programmed into you. And even, making those momentous decisions, to get married or not married, to have kids or not have kids, or whatever you're going to become in life, all of these things have been conditioned and programmed. And so the idea that there's, some absolute owner or controller to the consciousness, this is something that actually the Paticcasamuppada is trying to kind of explain, to see how all these things arise dependent on other causes and conditions. So, but that connection between the volitional formations and how it keeps producing consciousness. At the time of death, it'll produce consciousness in a next life. But if somebody attains enlightenment in this life, like the Buddha or so many other arahants, by practicing the Dhamma, and you stop accumulating more and more and more sankharas, and especially the negative ones, and you start developing wisdom, then you can start to reduce the amount of the strength and negative sankharas that are in the mind, and reducing ignorance. You can do that through the practice of the Dhamma. And if one is able to attain full enlightenment through that practice of Dhamma, where the ego is no longer exerting itself, and you're not producing any more karmic actions, that means adding fuel to the gas tank of sankhara, then at the time of death, no consciousness is propelled into another life. And that whole cycle of samsara or rebirth comes to an end. So that is that connection between the sankharas. Depending on sankharas arise the consciousness that keeps on arising from life to life, or even from moment to moment. The consciousness with ignorance. So that has been sort of the roots of greed, hatred, and delusion have been destroyed through the practice of Dhamma. So the volitional formations don't have any strength to produce the rebirth consciousness, and that process stops. So that is the main connection. And how, because of ignorance, and volitional formation. That is what we're actually working on in the practice of Dhamma. And especially reducing, transforming the negative conditioning and the negative sankharas that are going to produce suffering. So that's what I wanted to, basically talk about this week. Now, if anybody has any questions based on this, then we'll see if there's a question. With all respect to Buddhism, how can one prove that there is a past life or next life? Well, you could ask a counter question. How can you prove that there isn't? How can you prove that there isn't one? Who told you there isn't one? Did some religion tell you there wasn't one? Did they prove it? So you can't prove those things. You can't prove that there is one, or you can't prove that there isn't one. So, and consciousness, that's the difference between Western science and the Dhamma. Western science, everything has to be proved in a test tube or a petri dish, or it has to be measured on EKGs or EEGs, some kind of a machine. And that's why they haven't determined what consciousness is, and they haven't determined that the consciousness goes to another life, because they don't have any machine that can capture that. And so they say it doesn't exist, because they don't believe anything they can't capture. And because they don't meditate, they're not going to be able to experience that for themselves. But we take, faith in the Buddha that, he could remember the past lives, but even then we don't even have to have that kind of faith. We know how our consciousness goes on from moment to moment, even in this life. And people live, 60, 70, 80, 100 years, and they have built up a tremendous amount of, greed, hatred, and delusion. Or even people who die, younger. They have a lot of anger. That anger is a lot of energy. That anger produces a lot of energy. And greed has created this whole world. Okay, the earth was there, all the material things were there, but there was no cars, airplanes, houses. All these things were created by the greed, out of greed and desire. For more and more things, even all your fancy computers and everything else is all based on greed and desire. So, and so you think that that's just going to go poof when you die? All that energy that created the World War, the atomic bombs, is just going to go poof when somebody dies? To me, that's not scientific. That's, just wishful thinking based on some, somebody's thoughts. So the problem is that attachment to religions and attachment to beliefs, is what limits people's understanding. So a lot of people don't believe in meditation because it doesn't say that in their book. So they say, no, we can't meditate. Meditation from the devil. We've heard these things before. So, that closes people off. But anybody who actually then gets the courage to try it may eventually change their mind, and so on. But anyway, I don't want to, get into that argument here. But anyway, when somebody asks how you can prove that there's a past life or next life, ask them, prove that there isn't one. Okay? There's an increase in world population. Where are these souls come from? They come from the animal world. The samsara, the idea about samsara is there's many realms where this mind at death can take rebirth. The human realm is just one. There's the animal realm. Some animals can get a human rebirth if they have the right karmic conditions, and a human can be reborn as an animal if they live like an animal. In this life, they might be reborn as an animal. And if you live a holy life and a kind, you might be reborn in a Deva realm. So there's a lot of people in Deva realms, in the hells, hungry ghosts, all these different realms. Of course, science doesn't believe in any of them, although they talk about heaven and hell, but they don't really believe it, I guess. But or they think you're not reborn from there. Again, these are just religious beliefs which hold people back, so they don't even want to go there in scientific investigation. But the Buddha didn't limit himself to that. So anyway, that's how there's only almost 8 billion people in the world right now. 8 billion places, spots for people to get a human birth. In a space of, let's say, 80 or 90 years, all the 8 billion people are going to be dead and gone. Now it's about 100 years more, right? But there's billions and trillions of animals, and there's a lot of other beings in other realms that we don't know anything about, and they're waiting. They're waiting for their chance to be born as a human being. Now, of course, science don't believe in this. Other religions don't believe in this. So it's that's the problem. And it's not that we're trying to force people to believe in rebirth. No. I'll talk more about that later. But just to say it doesn't exist because, modern science says it doesn't, or a religious figure says it doesn't, or the interpretations or whatever, for whatever reason, people don't want certain realities to be known. So anyway, that's it's very difficult. And yes, there is a lot of research and things that have been gone into past lives. A lot of people can remember past lives, especially young children, but they're usually told to, it's just their imagination, don't believe that, and so on and so on. So there is evidence, but of course, again, if you can't capture it in a test tube or measure it on an electrical device, then science is not going to believe it. And science rules, right? So anyway, it's at some point, it's going to come out. The truth is going to come out. But anyway, we don't have to concern ourselves with that, because the practice of Dhamma doesn't concern about being reborn or not. It concerns about reducing suffering in this life itself while you're still living. That's the main thing. Okay, I see Joe Schaefer, you have a golden hand up. You have a question?
Yeah. Hi, Bhante. So I have a question about something that I might be misunderstanding from your last talk. Last week, somebody asked a question about when you're maybe in a jhana and deeply concentrated, should you keep noting things? And you had said that more or less you might only note things when you start to get distracted or so forth, and just kind of let the sense of self dissolve. And previously in other talks, you've also mentioned about watching the moment to moment differences or sensations on the body, and that gets faster and faster, kind of like watching an EKG or such. And so I was kind of struggling to understand like how I can put those two thoughts together in my meditation practice, because they kind of seem like you could do one or the other, but not at the same time to
The
me.
noting is for beginners in order to try to see and understand how each thing is just a moment of hearing, a moment of seeing. And if you don't note it, the beginner is going to get carried away in that. So the noting helps you, oh yes, it's just hearing, okay. And to let go of that sound and not to follow it, not build it up. And the same for sights or smells or anything in body sensations. And so, but when you are able to start noticing how quickly these things come and go, you aren't noting anymore because the mind doesn't have time to note, but you're aware. You're aware of something that arose and vanished. And so that is, but you're not reacting to those with any kind of trying to hold it or reject it. Everything, you build up the speed, but yeah, the noting has to be let go of at that point. But noting is just a beginner's technique. So you use that in the beginning if you need it, but if you're already beyond that point, you don't need to make the noting. And you just the pure awareness itself, but the alertness to see how quickly things are arising and vanishing. And there's a reason for that too, because as you're not clinging or identifying to any of the sight, sound, smells, taste, touches going through the body or mind, the sense of self starts to vanish, because the sense of self depends on your identification to those sensory stimulation. But when you're not reacting or giving them any, trying to build them up, the sense of self, because it's basically just an illusion anyway, it starts to disappear. So that's the concentration and the noting help you to get concentrated. But once you reach that state of the jhana, then that awareness becomes, that arising and vanishing becomes very, very crystal clear, and the noting is let go of at that point. That would slow you down. It's just a beginner's technique. Now, some teachers may say differently, but that's my take on it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, there's one more question. Damon.
Okay, mostly like every Wednesday we do meditation here, and we learn how to drop into the body and be in the here and now by using our breath. And so since we're already born, okay, we cannot change. We're stuck with the mind matter. We're stuck with our senses. We're stuck with contact. And we're even stuck with feeling, even if we're doing meditation, right? We can't always but the meditation you teach us can stop us from going from contact and feeling into craving, right? Because that's the good place to interrupt things, right? By using the...
I'm going to be talking about that a lot more later as we continue our study.
Okay.
But yeah. Once we're born, we already have our ignorance, volitional formations, consciousness, we have mind, body, six senses, and contacts, and we have the feelings. And basically you can't do anything about that. But what you can do is not to react to the feelings and produce more craving, grasping, and becoming. Okay. In short, but we'll talk more about that later. Okay, friends, time is kind of getting away, so I think we will stop here and take a few minutes break and come back to do a few stretches and then our meditation session. And then next week we will continue